My girlfriend used our joint fund for dates with another man. I said, enjoy yourself. Then I withdrew the entire balance in cash and closed the account. She was left frantically calling me from a restaurant after her card declined with her new man. I, 29M, discovered my girlfriend's betrayal in the most mundane way possible, through a banking notification on my phone while sitting in a client meeting. The alert showed a $200 withdrawal from our joint savings account at a restaurant I'd never heard of, at a time when she'd told me she was working late at the office. We'd been together for 3 years, living together for the past 18 months. The joint account was something she'd suggested when we moved in together, a way to save for our future, she said. We'd both been contributing equally, building toward a down payment on a house. The balance had grown to just over $47,000, representing years of careful saving and sacrifice. That first suspicious transaction gnawed at me throughout my meeting. When I got home that evening, she greeted me with the usual kiss and asked about my day. I mentioned seeing the restaurant charge, keeping my tone casual. She barely missed a beat, explaining she'd gone there for a work dinner with colleagues after their project deadline. Her explanation was smooth, practiced almost, but something felt off. The amount was too high for a work dinner where expenses would typically be reimbursed. And she'd never mentioned this colleague dinner when she texted me earlier about working late. I started paying closer attention to our account statements. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed a pattern. Charges at upscale restaurants, a wine bar downtown, even a weekend spa retreat that coincided with her claimed visit to see her sister. Each time, she had a ready explanation. Work events, catching up with old friends, treating herself to decompress from job stress. The amounts weren't enormous individually, $150 here, $300 there, but they were consistent and always when she told me she was somewhere else entirely. More troubling was how comfortable she seemed lying to my face each time I brought up the charges. 3 weeks after that first suspicious transaction, I decided to follow her. She'd texted that afternoon saying she was having dinner with her college roommate, who was in town unexpectedly. The charge had already appeared on my phone, $280 at an expensive steakhouse across town. I arrived at the restaurant and positioned myself where I could see through the front windows. What I saw made my stomach drop. She was there all right, but not with any college roommate. Sitting across from her was a man I'd never seen before, tall, well-dressed, probably in his mid-30s. They weren't having a casual catch-up dinner. Their body language screamed intimate relationship. She was leaning forward, laughing at something he said, her hand covering his across the table. I watched them for 30 minutes, my mind reeling. This wasn't a new development. The way they interacted showed familiarity, comfort, history. She touched his arm when she laughed. He reached over to brush a strand of hair from her face. These were the gestures of established lovers, not new acquaintances. The worst part was watching her pay the check with our joint debit card. Money we'd saved together, sacrifice by sacrifice, was funding her affair. Every dollar in that account represented something we'd given up for our shared future, dinners out we'd skipped, vacations we'd postponed, cheaper apartments we'd endured to save more. I drove home in a daze, arriving before she did. When she walked in an hour later, she kissed me and launched into an elaborate story about her roommate's new job and relationship drama. She was animated, detailed, convincing. If I hadn't seen her with my own eyes, I might have believed every word. That night, lying next to her as she slept peacefully, I made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her immediately. I wasn't going to create a scene or demand explanations she'd only lie about anyway. Instead, I was going to let her show me exactly who she was. The next morning, I told her I'd be traveling for work the following week, a complete lie. I wanted to see how bold she'd become when she thought she had complete freedom. She seemed pleased about my trip, already suggesting she might use the time to catch up with friends. I took the week off work instead, telling my boss I had a family emergency. Each day, I monitored our account and watched her patterns. The charges came fast and frequent. Expensive lunches, boutique shopping, premium movie tickets, high-end cocktail bars. In 5 days, she spent over $1,800 of our money, each transaction coinciding with her texts to me about quiet evenings at home or casual coffee dates with girlfriends. On Thursday, I followed her again. This time, they went to an art gallery opening, then dinner at a rooftop restaurant downtown. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before, probably purchased with our money based on the boutique charges from earlier that week. Watching her laugh and flirt with him while spending our future together was surreal. She seemed happier with him than I'd seen her with me in months. I realized this wasn't just an affair, it was a complete double life. She was essentially using me as a financial foundation while building a real relationship with someone else. The joint account wasn't just convenient for her, it was enabling her entire deception. That evening, when she called to say goodnight and tell me about her quiet day reading at home, I made my final decision. She asked when I'd be back, and I told her I'd gotten extended another few days. The excitement in her voice when she said she'd miss me but understood was barely concealed. Friday morning, I drove to our bank and requested to close the joint account, withdrawing the entire balance in cash. The teller seemed surprised by the large cash withdrawal, but everything was legal and properly documented. I had full access to the account, just as she did. The balance was $43,847 after her recent spending spree. I spent that afternoon opening a new individual savings account and depositing the money, keeping careful records of everything. Then I packed my essential belongings and moved them to a storage unit. I wasn't ready to completely disappear yet, but I wanted to be prepared. Saturday evening came, and like clockwork, my phone showed a new charge attempt on the closed account. Then another, then a third. All declined. My phone started ringing 20 minutes later. Her voice was panicked when I answered. She was at dinner, and her card wasn't working. Could I check our account? Maybe call the bank. There must be some mistake. Her date was sitting right there. She whispered, and she was mortified. I let her talk for a full minute before responding calmly that there was no mistake. I told her I knew about her boyfriend, about the months of lies, about how she'd been spending our future together on her affair. The silence on the other end was deafening. When she finally spoke, the panic in her voice had turned to anger. She accused me of spying on her, of being controlling, of overreacting to innocent friendships. Even caught red-handed, she was still lying, still trying to manipulate the situation. I told her I was done. The account was closed, the money was secure, and she could figure out how to pay for her date night with her new boyfriend. Then I hung up. My phone exploded with calls and texts over the next hour. First panic, then anger, then attempts at bargaining. She promised to explain everything, claimed it wasn't what I thought, insisted we could work through this. When I didn't respond, she shifted to accusations, claiming I'd stolen money that was half hers, threatening legal action, calling me vindictive and cruel. I finally replied with a single text telling her that every transaction was documented, that her fraudulent use of our joint funds for an affair was the real theft, and that she should collect her belongings from the apartment by the end of the week. Update 1. The week following the restaurant incident was a whirlwind of drama I hadn't anticipated. She'd apparently had to call her sister to come pay for the dinner, creating a humiliating scene at the restaurant. Her date had left during the confusion, which somehow became my fault in her mind. She showed up at the apartment Tuesday evening, alternating between tears and rage. She'd spent the weekend crafting a narrative where I was the villain, controlling, paranoid, financially abusive. According to her version, her relationship with the other man was purely emotional support during a rough patch in our relationship. The expensive dates were just her way of having someone to talk to when I was being distant and unavailable. The gaslighting was impressive in its scope. She claimed I'd been neglecting her for months, that she'd tried to communicate her needs, but I was always too busy with work. Her new friend was just someone who listened to her. And yes, maybe she'd developed feelings, but they'd never been physical. The romantic dinners and intimate touches I'd witnessed were reframed as a confused woman seeking comfort during a relationship crisis I'd caused. What struck me wasn't just the lies, but how passionately she seemed to believe them. She'd rewritten history in her mind so completely that she was genuinely outraged by my actions. In her version, I'd humiliated an innocent woman for having male friends and seeking emotional support outside our relationship. I let her talk for 2 hours, occasionally asking clarifying questions that only dug her deeper into contradictions. If this was just emotional support, why lie about her whereabouts? If they weren't physical, why the intimate body language and romantic settings? If she was trying to communicate relationship problems with me, when had these conversations happened? Each question made her angrier. Eventually, she switched tactics entirely, admitting there had been feelings involved, but claiming it never became physical. She'd been planning to end it and focus on our relationship, she said. My spying and financial manipulation had destroyed her chance to make things right. I asked her directly. If she was planning to end things with him, why had she seemed so excited about my extended work trip? Why had her spending accelerated when she thought she had more freedom? That's when her composure finally cracked. She screamed that yes, she had feelings for him, and maybe she was exploring where they led, but that didn't give me the right to steal from her. The money in that account was half hers, and using it to punish her was illegal theft. I calmly explained that joint accounts worked both ways. She'd had the right to spend the money, and I'd had the right to withdraw it. Her fraudulent misrepresentation of how she was spending our shared savings was the actual legal issue, not my withdrawal. I'd documented every transaction and had evidence of her lies about each one. She left that night with 2 suitcases, promising this wasn't over. Update 2. She made good on her threat to escalate things. Thursday morning, I got a call from a lawyer's office requesting I contact them about a civil matter. When I called back, I learned she was exploring legal action for the money, claiming financial abuse and theft. I scheduled a consultation with my own attorney Friday morning. Bringing bank statements, screenshots of her lies about her whereabouts, and photos I'd taken of her with the other man, I laid out the entire situation. My lawyer was blunt. She had no case. Joint account holders have equal access to funds, and her fraudulent use of shared money for an extramarital affair actually gave me stronger legal ground than she had. If she wanted to involve lawyers, we could discuss her breach of our cohabitation agreement and fraudulent misrepresentation of shared expenses. More importantly, my lawyer suggested documenting all shared assets and expenses to protect myself from further claims. We'd been splitting rent, utilities, and groceries, but everything was in both names. If she wanted to play legal hardball, I needed to be prepared for her to potentially damage my credit or claim ownership of things she hadn't paid for. That afternoon, I received a call from her sister, who I'd always gotten along with well. The conversation was awkward but illuminating. She wanted to understand my side of things because the story she'd heard didn't make complete sense. According to her sister, I was a controlling boyfriend who'd become suspicious of normal social activities and had retaliated by stealing money when she tried to maintain friendships outside our relationship. She'd painted herself as a victim of financial abuse, struggling to rebuild her independence after escaping a restrictive relationship. I asked her sister directly, did she believe it was normal to lie about your whereabouts repeatedly while spending shared savings on expensive dates with someone else? Did she think it was reasonable to use money saved for a home together to fund a secret relationship? The silence on the other end told me everything. Her sister asked quietly if I had proof of the lies and secret spending. When I confirmed that I did, she sighed deeply and said she'd suspected something wasn't right about the story. It turned out her sister had been questioning the narrative from the beginning. She'd never heard me described as controlling in 3 years of relationship stories. Moreover, she'd been the one called to the restaurant to pay for dinner, and she'd seen the man her sister was with. The interaction didn't look like innocent friendship. Her sister apologized for bothering me and said she'd stay out of the situation, but she appreciated understanding what had really happened. Update 3. 2 weeks after the restaurant incident, I learned the full scope of her deception through an unexpected source. The man she'd been seeing contacted me through social media. His message was apologetic and confused. He'd had no idea I existed. According to him, they'd met 4 months earlier at a work conference. She'd told him she was single, recently out of a long relationship, and taking time to figure out her next steps. They'd been dating regularly since then, and he'd started developing serious feelings for her. The restaurant incident had been jarring for him too. When her card was declined and she made frantic phone calls, he'd offered to pay, but she'd insisted on calling her sister instead. She'd been agitated and distracted for the rest of the evening, then had barely communicated with him since. He'd started putting pieces together when mutual friends mentioned seeing her around town with someone who looked like a boyfriend. When he confronted her about it, she'd broken down and confessed that she was still living with her ex, me, but only because of financial constraints and lease obligations. According to her story to him, we'd been over romantically for months, but were stuck in a complicated living situation. She'd claimed I was possessive and making it difficult for her to move on, monitoring her activities and controlling shared finances. The joint account closure was my way of trapping her in the relationship by making it impossible for her to save money to leave. He'd reached out to me because her story wasn't sitting right with him. If we'd been broken up for months, why were her social media accounts still full of couple photos of us? Why had she never mentioned being in the process of leaving a relationship when they'd had conversations about becoming exclusive? I appreciated his honesty and told him the truth about our relationship timeline and living situation. We'd been together until the moment I discovered her affair. The joint account was savings for our shared future, not money she was saving to leave me. Her claims about our relationship being over were complete fabrications. He was quiet for a long time before thanking me for being straight with him. He said he felt manipulated and used, that she'd essentially been cheating on both of us by lying about the nature of our relationship. The next day, I received another angry call from her. Apparently, he'd ended things immediately after our conversation, and she blamed me for ruining another relationship with my jealousy and manipulation. I pointed out that I'd simply told him the truth about our relationship timeline, something she could have done months earlier. If honesty ruined her chances with him, perhaps the problem wasn't my jealousy, but her deception. She hung up on me, but not before declaring that she'd find a way to make me pay for destroying her happiness. Final update. A month later, I was settled into a new apartment and had started processing the end of our relationship. The money from our joint account became the down payment on a small condo, the future we'd saved for, just for one person instead of two. She made one final attempt at reconciliation, showing up at my workplace on a Friday afternoon. She looked different, tired, stressed, older somehow. The confident woman who'd been living a double life had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely lost. Her approach was different this time too. No anger, no accusations, just a quiet request to talk. She admitted she'd made mistakes, that she'd handled things badly, that she'd been confused about what she wanted. She claimed the relationship with the other man had been a mistake born out of fear about our future together. According to this final version of events, she'd gotten scared about the seriousness of our relationship and had sabotaged it by getting involved with someone else. The lies had spiraled out of control, and she'd been too cowardly to come clean. She insisted that she'd realized I was what she really wanted, that losing me had shown her what mattered. I listened without interrupting, watching her perform what seemed like genuine remorse. When she finished, she asked if there was any possibility of starting over, of rebuilding trust, of salvaging what we'd had. I told her that trust, once shattered so completely, couldn't be rebuilt. The person she'd revealed herself to be, someone capable of months of elaborate deception while looking me in the eye every day, wasn't someone I could share a life with. The issue wasn't just the affair, but the calculated nature of the lies and the ease with which she'd spent our future on her betrayal. She started crying, insisting she could change, that everyone deserved a second chance, that what we'd had was worth fighting for. But I realized that what I'd thought we had been largely an illusion. The woman I'd loved had been honest and trustworthy. The woman sitting in front of me had proven herself to be neither. I wished her well and walked away. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that she'd moved back to her hometown. The other man had started dating someone new. Her attempt to play both sides had cost her everything she'd been trying to choose between. As for me, the betrayal had been devastating, but the way I'd handled it had taught me something important about my own strength. I'd remained calm, documented everything, and protected myself legally and financially. Most importantly, I'd refused to let someone else's choices destroy my own integrity. The $43,847 became the foundation for a new life I was building entirely for myself. And for the first time in years, every dollar I saved was going toward a future I could trust completely, because it was mine alone. Looking back, the restaurant phone call had been the perfect metaphor for our entire relationship. She'd been dining on our shared dreams while building a life with someone else, and when reality finally caught up with her deception, she was left with nothing but panic and blame. Sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate or cruel. Sometimes it's simply refusing to fund someone else's betrayal of your trust. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe and hype button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe and press the hype button. Thanks in advance.